So every week, Kent is making worse and worse arguments. If this keeps up, I'm going to blow a fucking gasket. Okay, what's this week's topic? Oil pressure? Huh. Okay, this sounds interesting. I bet you thought I was going to call him a son of a bitch. Okay, so I'm just going to put this out there. This is another topic I'm fairly familiar with. I have a good idea on a few points I want to make, and I think I have a good idea on what he is going to try to say. I haven't watched the video yet, of course. If I were to make predictions, I mean, it's kind of obvious since we make oil from organic material. Now, he will say it was made rather quickly after the flood. I have over 45 minutes of video to get through, a case of liquid painkiller. I think I'm ready.
Tonight, oil and gas. This is all from the biomass that was buried in the flood in the days of Noah.
I am getting really good at these predictions. Yes, oil is made from biomass. No, it cannot be from the days of Noah. Even if we grant that a sufficient amount of biomass was buried, even if we grant that it was buried far enough down, even if we allow the proper temperature for biological material to occur after, we can't just grant that it would suddenly have been dry enough down there after the flood for the material to decompose in a proper way to create crude oil. Kent is asking for so much here in just his opening statement. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get into this in more depth soon, but I don't want to just dump everything out all at once. That wouldn't make for entertaining video of poking fun at Kent, now would it?
Oil pressure down in the earth. When they drill down into the ground, sometimes goes shooting out of the hole. A gusher, oil. How did it get all that pressure down there? And how long would the rock hold that pressure before it cracked?
Seriously, Kent? The oil is sitting under and inside millions of tons of rock. And you want to ask why it's under pressure? Are you joking? Man, you gotta just be fucking with me at this point. But okay. Let's give an answer to this. Oil forms deep underground. After this, and to put it simply, it wants to float. So it will slowly seep to the surface until it gets to a rock layer it can't penetrate. It's trying to move from a high pressure area to a low pressure area. Like, oh, I don't know, the surface. Well, since it's already under pressure from all the damn rock sitting on it, it starts to pool in the same places a few hundred meters below the surface, gaining more and more pressure inside the rock. But with that much rock sitting on it, the pressure is immense. Now picture some company drills down and hits a spot where there is a reservoir of oil. All of that pressure wants to go somewhere, and it now has an easy way out. The higher the pressure, the bigger the initial gush of oil. As for how long it would hold that pressure, well, let's see, millions of tons pushing down on oil made from biomass that was already down there? Suffice it to say, it would be a hell of a lot more than he thinks. If there were any chance on it bursting like an oil volcano, it would have to be close to the surface to even have a chance.
Oil or petroleum is readily combustible fossil fuel, mainly composed of carbon and hydrogen, thus known as a hydrocarbon. The formation of oil takes a significant amount of time, with oil beginning to form millions of years ago.
At this point, I'd say Kent is right. However, he doesn't believe a word of what he just said. Well, save for the definition of what oil actually is, he's just reading from a definition. But yes, it started forming millions of years ago. Outside of a lab, conditions of biomass turning to oil are very specific. It needs a high heat, high pressure, dry conditions underground, low oxygen, and a very deep burial under solid rock.
The beginning of crude oil happened millions of years ago. Oil is a fossil fuel formed from many tiny plants and animals, such as algae and zooplankton. So the oil is down there from plants and animals that got buried. These organisms fall to the bottom of the sea once they die and get trapped under multiple layers of sand and mud over time. What would do that?
Not a massive flood, I assure you. I think it's deep enough into this series to just put an end to the flood myth once and for all. Now, shall we talk about the flood from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where only one guy lived, the Egyptian floods where Ra sent Sekhmet to destroy a part of humanity, the one from the Kiangang peoples of South America that fled into the mountains, the Great Flood of Ganyu in China, and in Vietnam, the story that leaves two survivors to marry, at times siblings, other times gross, and they populate the earth again after giving birth to two gourds of biological goo. There are flood stories in the legends of every civilization known to man, with very few exceptions. Like Japan doesn't have a flood myth. Wonder why, with all the mountains there. But they do have earthquakes instead that swallowed people up. So in short, the Bible isn't the only culture with a flood myth. The question you have to ask yourself is, why would all these other cultures have different flood myths if only one global flood happened? According to the Bible, God said that Noah, he said to Noah that he would never do that shit again. And if all these other flood myths are true, where do those myths come from? Simple. There was a flood. It was local. It was greatly embellished upon, and ended up just like all the other varying flood myths that were embellished upon that came out over time in many different cultures. These cultures, while naive, blame the floods on their particular flavor of God being angry with them, and a story is born. Not similar in every single culture, not exactly the same, just similar. So fuck you, Kent. You don't get to suck on the biblical pacifier you seem to have so many of. Now, I know I just skipped over most of the start of Kent's comment. I'm not dodging it. I'm saving it. Work with me here.
Physics forums. How long does it take the Earth to form 1 gallon of oil? In a lab, it can take hours or days. The actual process, catogenesis, is quite fast. Getting the raw material into the situation where it can start in the first place is the hard part. And that is the bit that takes a long time. Natural oil production is not like an industrial process that's done in a gallon at a time, but millions of barrels in one setup.
Kent, it's actually catagenesis, C-A-T-A. The person that posted the reply he is quoting corrects this spelling shortly after. Another example of old Kent cherry-picking the quotes he wants to use to support his claims. Yes, I researched and found the quote again. The amusing part is at the end of the passage, which Kent doesn't show, the author states, "Caution. This is a question that comes up a lot in young Earth creationist circles, with the shorter answers being paraded about as evidence that the scientists have got it wrong again." Catagenesis is the time and process where heat and pressure aid in the transformation of biomass underground into oil. It can only happen in very specific conditions, which is why there isn't oil everywhere in the world. At temperatures of 50 degrees centigrade to 150 degrees centigrade, and under great pressure, the oil will take between 10,000 to a few million years to form, as long as, and this is important for Kent, as long as there is no oxygen present and the majority of the water has been pressed out of the biomatter by the pressure. Let's take a pause here and think back to how Kent thinks this all happened. A flood of water that was churning around and oxygenating. What do you say to that, Kent?
Who cares, okay?
Your listeners do. They're looking for honesty. You aren't really giving it to them. Let's have you try to say something honest for once.
Let's see, I like Fahrenheit. I don't like centigrade. I understand centigrade. I'm going to fight against the metric system till I die. Sweetly in Christian love. This is America, the land of the free and the home of the slave, okay?
Hold up. Land of the fee and home of the what now? Holy fuck, Kent, you really need to stop saying stupid shit. If you can't stop your tongue from saying something stupid, stop talking.
In a typical petroleum system like the Mississippi River Delta, it may take 10 million years to bury the material deep enough for it to reach temperatures of catagenesis. Add in some volcanic activity that makes a high geothermal gradient, and that timing may be quite short and no longer in millions of years. So your estimate, 10,000 years, is way too long for the process itself and too short for it to happen naturally. Caution. This is a question that comes up a lot in young Earth creationist circles, with the shorter answers being paraded about as evidence that the scientists have got it wrong yet again. Thanks for the quick reply. Just speculating on whether it might be possible to geoengineer new petroleum deposits, or if maybe this is happening naturally right now at a rate that could be a fraction of world consumption. Yes, creationists are annoying. I swear. I'm sure you do, okay? Richard Dawkins has devoted his life to opposing them.
Well, obviously, this was the continuation of the earlier quote. I recognized it the moment it appeared on the screen. And I seriously didn't think he was going to call himself out like this for cherry picking. But what Kent has done is actually screw himself over. The process itself happens in the thousands of years, while the situation for it to happen takes millions of years. And since I'm guessing he is going to dispute the situation and say it was a flood, I am so happy he's done this. In the event of a flood like he claims, which is heavier, biological material or inorganic solids? Well, inorganic solids like rock would settle first. What Kent expects you to believe is that the biomass settled down, then millions of tons of rock and stone landed on top of this biomass, then the mud and sediment on top of that. He wants you to think it was pressed down so deep, hundreds of feet underground, so that all the heavy oxygenated water would be pushed out of that biomass, and then the ground gets heated up into the correct temperature so that oil can form, and he wants you to think all of that happened in a couple thousand years. Let's just shit all over this for a moment with simple logic. The biomass we're talking about here is marine life, not people, not the dinosaurs. We are talking about marine life in the shallows. But the marine life is the only shit that survived the flood. Everything in the oceans were the creatures that would have lived, and not the other way around. That is a fatal flaw in Kent's logic, that this all happened in a global flood. In a massive flood like he is claiming, human and animal biomass, being very light, would have stayed up by the surface in the case of the waters rushing about, not to mention the fact that they would have been floating while the water settled down, and the heavier material, like mud and stone, settle out of the water, leaving people and land animals as the last things to settle to the seafloor before the waters receded, as the material finally becomes waterlogged enough for them to sink.
Well, you can make oil faster than it's being consumed. That's easy. They can make oil. It just takes more energy to do it than you get back from the oil. If it costs you $10 to make a barrel of oil, or make $5 worth of oil, that's not a good idea, right?
Kent, you are an idiot. You are a complete idiot. I would ask if you even read what he said, but you did read it from the clip in the video. I can explain this to you, but I can't understand it for you. The energy cost to make the oil is higher than the energy cost you get from the oil, not the monetary cost. The point they were trying to make is that making more oil synthetically is not energy efficient.
What about this oil pressure down there in the ground?
What about it? The oil has millions of tons of rock sitting on it. It's going to be... No. We are not letting the sound clip demons take control of this video. I allowed it for the biblical slavery joke when I talked about Yahweh got a... I have to be careful what I say from now on. Anyway.
Moving right along.
Stop!
All this water comes out in one spot, the Mississippi, in this 1.2 million square mile area, and we're washed out into the Gulf of Mexico and covered by 6 miles of mud, probably in a few months.
So what you're trying to say is that the biomass washed out into the Gulf of Mexico and stayed there instead of continuing on to the Atlantic Ocean? Is that what you're trying to say there, Kent? You see, my wonderful viewers, Kent is a moron and doesn't think things out far enough to see that his ideas are preposterous. The reason there is so much oil there in the Gulf of Mexico is because the biomass didn't have a huge rush of water plowing it out like a liquid battering ram. The fact that there is oil there is not evidence of a global flood. It's evidence against a global flood. Good job there, Kent. You see, always let the theists talk. They debunk themselves all the time. He goes on about oil pressure underground, how it can be over 10,000 psi way down there. Nothing really good enough to clip. He seems unsure of his own argument with how fractured he sounds through this. As usual, he starts to repeat the same points that explain how oil is formed over and over. What is formed from and how much there is, but we aren't concerned with how much there is. There is a lot of it, but we use a lot of it too. Though he does talk about something interesting that I can clip.
They're down there trying to pump the oil out. There's little bitty cracks in the ground, and the oil slowly seeps in, and when it gets enough, the switch triggers it, turns the pump on, and pumps it out. So they do a fracture job, a frac job they call it. Production can be achieved in these wells, produced stimulation method called well fracturing. Well fracturing breaks and splits the reservoir rock open to encourage hydrocarbons to flow from the rocks into the well.
I am pleased that he brought this up. Fracking is a bit of a controversial topic. In short, what they do is they blow up a well that is fairly dried up to make more cracks in the rock that holds the oil. Oil doesn't pool in a cavern or something like some people will think. It's inside the rock itself. And like I said earlier, oil wants to move up to an area of lower pressure. So this is why oil doesn't just explode the rock and burst out of the ground. It's a pressure inside the rock that will make microfractures in the rock, which allows the oil to seep out. The pressure is caused from oil inside the rock, not oil pressing on rock. Well, what fracking does is allow the oil to have more points of escape so it can seep into these cracks and then will fill the well back up again. So a once dry well will be able to produce oil again faster with access for the oil to flow out of the rock it's in. The reason this is controversial is mainly contamination of the water table above the oil deposit. Oil companies work hard to prevent this as much as possible, but admittedly some contamination does happen. The other major downside to fracking is an increase in earthquake activity since the rock underground is now less stable. Realistically, the earthquakes this can cause tend to be minimal since it's not a fault line shifting, it's instead the stone that was cracked settling. Most of the other downsides are similar to or the same as drilling a new well. In another area, the skeptics tend to overlook the environmental cost to drilling a new well versus fracking an older one. That being said, earthquakes suck, and no one likes contaminated water. So,
moving right along.
Quit it! Well, you are going to stop. Kent, just go ahead.
Okay, Creation Magazine. Converting organic waste into oil. 1971, oil was made in 20 minutes. 1996, $22 million proposal at the West Australia plant to create oil from sewage sludge in 30 minutes. Pump out the sewer and under heat and pressure turn it into oil in 30 minutes.
Now, I find this entertaining as hell. Twice earlier, we mentioned to be careful of creationists cherry-picking things. Remind us again, Kent, who was the one posting that?
Okay, Creation Magazine.
Right, that's what I thought. So let's check over all of that, shall we? Let's take claim 1. I found it. It's from a book through the Pittsburgh Energy Research Center. It's an idea abandoned because it would cost more energy and resources than we would gain from making the oil. We would spend more oil than we would make, thus making the endeavor pointless. Let's take claim 2. In this one, they are using hydroelectricity, a renewable energy source, to take our poop and turn it into oil, using renewable clean energy to make a shit-powered car. I didn't find his 1996 article, but what I did find was a 2018 article that says they are still trying to get it done. Same proposal, same people, same idea. So a lot of talk, no action over 20 years there, but it's done through ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. Looking through this and, oh, the project was abandoned in 2019 completely. Good job there, Kent. But I know what you're trying to do. Kent is trying to show that the oil could be made quickly. The problem is, yes, some oil can be made in a short amount of time in a lab, but the millions of gallons of oil can't be made in the 30 minutes he is trying to claim.
Said we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Well, how do you know Mother Nature took millions of years? Because somebody told you to say that because you can't get a degree if you don't agree with them? That can't get peer-reviewed published? Mm-hmm.
Just because we can do something at a small scale in a lab doesn't mean it can be done by nature in the same amount of time. Only that we can figure out how it happens in nature. There is no magic wand that someone waves around and says, "Alakazam, oil!" Your argument here fails as usual, Kenny boy. He then goes on to talk about changing world technologies, who, on a bit of digging, was found to have gone through Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2009. Came out of it and was sold off to Ridgeline Energy in late 2012. Lawsuits of the rotting turkey smell. It was a complete mess. He even screwed up and tried to say this was currently ongoing, not realizing it crashed out completely more than 10 years ago. Kent isn't very up to date at all. The reason I'm not clipping it is he goes on it for like 5 minutes in there for a facility that doesn't exist anymore. And we're already getting too long for a Kent video anyway. Does he have any arguments on his side instead of trying to cause doubt in the time frame of geology?
The Earth broke open, cracked all over the place. These fault lines are everywhere. San Andreas Fault, Hayward Fault, New Madrid Fault. The Earth is all busted up like an eggshell.
Oh no. Fuck, please no. Kent, don't do it. Please, don't tell me you're going to say something this completely stupid.
And some of those cracks are still moving. It's where we have earthquakes and volcanoes. Those cracks are probably where the hot water came squirting out from inside the ocean. That hot water, inside the Earth, that hot water coming out would kill organisms in the sea by the quadrillions.
You did. For Darwin's sake, Kent, did you think that was a brilliant revelation? Are you proud of yourself for that leap in logic? Did you pat yourself on the back over that? Over saying that the tectonic plates around the globe and all the fault lines around the planet are actually the cracks in the earth where the water, boiling hot water, came out. Did you even think for half a moment about the logic of what would follow from that bit of utter, unimaginable stupidity? I mean, you remind me of Baskin Robbins because you are 31 flavors of all fucked up there.
As the water escapes from under the crust, the crack's going to get wider, causing the basalt to lift up underneath, and the continents are going to slide away off that rising bump of basalt,
causing magma worldwide to be exposed, adding more heat to the water until it's boiling, the ground to shift, causing tidal waves to form across the entire planet of boiling hot water, and the air to fill with steam, turning the entire planet into an air fryer, cooking Noah and all the animals and dinosaurs inside of his ark into the biggest barbecue the world has ever seen. Not to mention the idea that Kent thinks the world had a shell of ice that would now be completely melted, self-debunking his previous claim about the ice cores, while also killing every living thing in the planet, including Noah and the Ark. This is the shit that happens when someone like Kent doesn't follow through on something's natural conclusion. I bet Kent is still going to call this a win. He goes on a diatribe about diatomaceous earth, claiming the place was underwater in the flood. No, that just means it was underwater. Which, yeah, most of the land used to be underwater. Geologists actually found evidence that Pangaea was only the latest time the Earth had a supercontinent. It happened several times in the past, with parts of the surface being above sea level and below sea level multiple times. So no shock there. Then onto the chalk cliffs of Dover. Let's put it this way. These two areas, he thinks, were the sea creatures killed off by the flood. Well, if that's so, and these are 500 meters thick, the ocean at its deepest point is 11,000 meters deep. So that is 1 meter's worth of these for every 22 meters of ocean. And that's just the ocean as we have it now. For this to happen worldwide with a layer this thick, there would have to be 4 times this amount. So now we're talking a meter of crustaceans for every 5 meters of water. And all of this built up over the less than 2,000 years between the creation and Noah. Adding on to the fact that he thinks these died from a torrent of fresh water shooting out of the ground, pushing them away from the fault lines he calls cracks in the crust. And yet he points to large deposits right next to them. Kent, pick up a physics textbook once in a while. You might learn something. So let's recap. Kent's oblivious understanding of physics led him to have no idea what he was talking about and debunk his own point here and contradict his own point from a previous video. I love letting these guys talk. If you just let them talk, they ruin their own arguments every single time. This series is going to kill me. But I think I'm going to kill him. No, you're not. Get over here.
You can't touch this.
We'll see about that. I am Corsi. This is the Fluffy Atheist. If you like it, thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Help me out sharing a funny video if you want to point and laugh. Now get over here. Oh, you won't feel a thing.